The wetlands of North Carolina looked like they were holding their breath that morning. Mist rolled low across the cypress trees, heavy and pale, swallowing the first light of dawn. Every sound seemed distant, the drip of water from a mossed branch, the distant call of an egret, the hush of wind over still water. Then came the howl. It wasn't long or melodic like the ones tourists sometimes heard on recorded loops at the museum. This one was raw, broken in half, more a cry than a song. It came again, closer this time, and then stopped as suddenly as it began. Through the fog, a movement red fur flashing between reeds. A mother red wolf. Her coat streaked with clay, and rain was darkened near the chest where she had scraped the ground searching for her pups. Her amber eyes darted across the swamp like lightning. She had been calling all night, her voice bouncing through the pines unanswered. Half a mile away, hidden behind a viewing blind, Claire Whitfield watched through binoculars. Her hands trembled slightly despite years in the field. On the monitor beside her, the telemetry receiver blinked erratically. One of the collared wolves from the recovery area had stopped moving hours ago. That was the mother. The storm 3 nights ago had torn through the refuge flooding dens, uprooting trees, scattering wildlife. The field teams had found 2 lifeless pups downstream the day before. The rest of the litter, still unaccounted for. Claire's throat tightened. She'd worked with red wolves for nearly a decade, first in captivity, then in the field. She'd seen them born, raised, released, and sometimes found too late. But this mother, this one felt different. She was one of the few surviving matriarchs of the wild pack, the heart of a species hanging by a thread. Still no movement, her colleague whispered through the radio. Claire didn't answer. She was staring at the mother wolf, who had stopped pacing. For a brief second, their eyes seemed to meet through the fog. The animal tilted her head, sniffing the air as if sensing something familiar. Something human, yet not dangerous. Claire lowered her binoculars. Her voice came out softer than a breath. She's looking for hope. For the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, every living red wolf counted. There were barely 30 left in the wild, each one a lifeline to the species' future. And now, one mother stood alone, her den silent, her instinct screaming to nurture what was no longer there. Back at the field station, an idea had already begun to form, a desperate, almost unthinkable idea. If a wild mother had lost her pups, and if a captive litter had one extra healthy strong, the same age, could they give her a chance to love again? Claire's heart pounded as she watched the wolf vanish into the mist. She didn't know yet that this decision, the one she would soon make, would change the course of her life, and perhaps the fate of the red wolves themselves. How do you return hope to a mother who has lost everything? When people meet Claire Whitfield for the first time, they rarely imagine the mud-caked boots, the mosquito-bitten arms, or the years she's spent sleeping on damp forest floors. In her museum ID photo, she looks neat and composed. Khaki shirt, quiet smile, hair pulled into a braid. But in the field, she is a different person entirely. Sunburned, focused, and often speaking in whispers, as if afraid to break the rhythm of the wild. Claire had joined the North Carolina Museum of Natural Sciences, fresh out of college, driven by a love for animals that started when she was a child. Her family used to vacation near the Outer Banks, where she'd watch the sun sink behind the wetlands and wonder what lived beyond the tree line. Back then, red wolves were ghosts spoken of in past tense. Declared extinct in the wild in 1980, they existed only in captivity in fenced reserves, where survival was measured by breeding reports and genetic charts. That was before the Red Wolf Recovery Program, before the long, fragile experiment of returning them to the wild. By the time Claire joined, there were fewer than 25 red wolves left roaming free in eastern North Carolina. Every birth, every pairing, every reintroduction was a gamble between science and fate. Inside the museum's wildlife facility, Claire oversaw one of the few captive breeding pairs still contributing to the recovery project. The male rowan was broad-shouldered, cautious, his golden eyes always scanning for unseen threats. The female juniper was smaller, her fur a striking russet shade that shimmered in sunlight. Together, they had raised 3 litters under Claire's care. She knew their every habit, the way rowan marked the fence line after rain, the low rumble juniper made when her pups tumbled too close to the enclosure wall. But Claire didn't see them as exhibits. They were teachers. She spent hours studying how they communicated, a flick of the ear, a brush of the tail, a shared glance that spoke volumes about loyalty and trust. It wasn't just caretaking, it was translation. Every morning began the same way: temperature checks, water changes, meat portions weighed to the gram. She moved with the precision of a scientist, but the tenderness of a mother. Each record entry in her logbook carried a note in the margins. Rowan more alert today. Juniper restless near the gate. Pup 3 vocalized after feeding curious behavior. Outside the museum, the red wolf story was harder to tell. Local farmers worried for their livestock often saw the species as an unwanted experiment. News articles painted a picture of failure: wolves shot pups, lost funds, drained. Claire understood their frustration, but she also knew the data that the headlines ignored: how every year, against all odds, the wild population found a way to persist. In 2024, something remarkable happened. For the first time in nearly a decade, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service recorded 43 red wolf pups born in the wild. Only 26 survived their first season, but that number, fragile as it was, felt like a heartbeat returning after years of silence. Claire remembered the day she saw the report. She printed the graph, circled the number in red ink, and taped it above her desk. "Hope isn't extinct," she wrote beneath it. Still, hope was never enough on its own. Each new pup carried the weight of an entire species. And with storms growing fiercer and habitat shrinking, every rescue, every transfer, every pairing had to be done with care that bordered on obsession. That spring, the facility's cameras captured the first signs of new life. Juniper nursing 5 tiny pups beneath the den log. Claire crouched beside the monitor, smiling quietly as the pups squirmed over one another. She named them alphabetically, A through E, though she would never say the names aloud. Naming meant attachment, and attachment could break you in this line of work. Healthy, the vet had said. Good weights, strong appetite. Claire exhaled for what felt like the first time in weeks. But 2 days later, the storm came. It had been forecasted as mild rain. Instead, it arrived as a wall of water tearing across the coast, with winds strong enough to rip branches from trees. Claire spent the night at the facility, listening to the roof creak and groan, praying the enclosures would hold. By morning, the roads were flooded, the power out, and phone lines dead. When the clouds finally cleared, word came from the field teams the wild dens had been hit hardest. Floodwaters had drowned parts of the recovery area. Several tracking collars had gone silent. Claire read the message twice. She didn't realize she was gripping the edge of her desk until her knuckles turned white. The red wolves had survived hurricanes before, but never like this. In the following days, the reports worsened: 2 pups found dead, 1 den destroyed, 1 mother missing. The fragile thread that held the species together was fraying again. Still, Claire kept showing up. She checked Juniper's pups' logged data-coordinated feed deliveries by boat when trucks couldn't reach the site. She told herself that as long as her wolves were safe, the program still had a chance. Then, 3 nights later, she received the call from the field station, the one about the mother wolf searching for her lost litter. Her colleague's voice crackled through static. "She's still out there, Claire. We can hear her calling every night." Claire pressed her palm against the rain-smeared window, staring into the storm-soaked forest beyond. Somewhere out there, a mother was grieving. And somewhere inside the nursery behind her, 5 healthy pups slept beneath a red heat lamp. For the first time, an impossible question began to take shape in her mind. Could one of them become her salvation? The rain had barely stopped when the trucks rolled out from the museum parking lot. The air smelled of salt and mud, North Carolina's coastal storm signature, and the sky was still bruised from the night before. Claire sat in the passenger seat beside a field biologist from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, her eyes fixed on the carrier box resting quietly in her lap. Inside, wrapped in a fleece-lined pouch and cushioned by soft straw, was Pup C, the third born of Juniper's litter. 10 days old, barely the size of Claire's palm. Its tiny chest rose and fell with shallow rhythmic breaths. "This is the one?" asked Daniel the driver, his voice cautious. Claire nodded. Strongest heartbeat, perfect weight, same age as the wild litter that was lost. Daniel hesitated before speaking again. "You know if she doesn't accept it?" "I know," Claire interrupted softly. "If she rejects him, he won't survive. But if we don't try, she'll never stop searching." Silence filled the truck. The wipers swept back and forth in steady rhythm. In the back seat, insulated coolers held gauze pads, and scenting cloths, soaked with the mother wolf's bedding odor, collected days earlier from the den site. The plan was delicate, almost surgical in its precision. The captive pup would be rubbed with the scent of the lost litter, then placed gently among the remains of the den. The mother's instinct would decide the rest. They reached the refuge by mid-morning. The forest was quiet except for the hum of cicadas and the crunch of wet leaves under their boots. Claire adjusted her cap and slung the telemetry receiver over her shoulder, its antenna beeping faintly as they tracked the signal from the collared female. "She's about half a kilometer northeast," Daniel murmured, watching the handheld screen. Claire's stomach tightened. "Close enough to watch us." At the den site, the ground was still damp, littered with broken branches and clumps of fir. The smell of earth and decay hung faintly in the air. Claire knelt, brushing aside leaves to reveal the hollow, a shallow bowl of mud and roots where the storm had swept everything away. She opened the carrier slowly. The pup stirred its nose, twitching as if searching for something familiar. Claire's hands shook as she lifted it, so small, so impossibly alive. Daniel handed her a cloth. "Use this first." She nodded gently, rubbing the pup's fur with the mother's scent, blending it into its own. Then she leaned closer to the den, whispering under her breath, as if confessing a prayer. "Please take him." She set the pup down and stepped back, motioning for Daniel to retreat. They withdrew behind a cluster of shrubs, setting up a remote camera on a tripod. The receiver clicked softly, picking up movement nearby, the collared wolf approaching. Minutes passed. Then, from the shadows, the red wolf emerged. She moved cautiously, her paws silent on the wet soil. Her ribs showed faintly beneath her coat, worn thin from days of searching. Her head lowered as she sniffed the den entrance, nostrils flaring. The scent was different, foreign, but faintly familiar. Claire's breath caught. "Come on, girl," she whispered. The wolf hesitated, ears flicking backward. For a moment it seemed she might turn away. But then the pup whimpered, a tiny, helpless sound that broke the silence. The mother froze. Her muscles tensed. And then slowly she stepped forward. The camera captured everything, the nudge of her nose against the pup's belly, the low whine that trembled from her throat, the careful lick that followed. The pup squeaked once more and nestled closer into her fur. Claire pressed a hand to her mouth. Daniel's eyes widened. "She's accepting him," he breathed. Tears burned behind Claire's eyes, but she didn't move. She knew the protocol: observe for an hour, then withdraw quietly. But her mind was already somewhere else, tracing the invisible thread that had just been woven between captivity and wilderness, between science and something sacred. As the minutes passed, the mother wolf curled around the pup, her body a living shelter. When she finally lay still, the forest seemed to exhale. For the first time since the storm, the telemetry signal pulsed steady and strong. Back at the truck, Claire removed her gloves, staring down at her trembling hands. "It's done," she said. She took him. Daniel smiled faintly. "Then maybe there's hope after all." Claire didn't answer right away. She looked out at the line of cypress trees, swaying in the wind, the mist lifting like smoke from the ground. "Hope," she murmured, "feels like a dangerous word. But today, I'll take it." They left quietly, leaving behind the forest and its new secret. That night, Claire watched the footage again and again, the moment the mother's instincts overcame her grief, the first touch of her nose against the pup's fur. She saved a still frame on her laptop, the wolf's eyes half closed, the pup nestled against her chest. In her notebook, she wrote one line: "Transfer successful. Maternal response confirmed." But beneath the technical note, she added another in smaller handwriting. She looked at him the same way Juniper looked at hers. The footage was sent to FWS headquarters, where it was logged as cross-fostering success number 11. It would later appear in a conservation briefing, one more quiet milestone in the long, uncertain survival of the red wolf. For Claire, though, it wasn't just another data point. It was a promise, a bond she couldn't explain, forged between a woman, a mother wolf, and a pup that had crossed worlds to find its family. She didn't know then that she would see them again. Not through a monitor, not behind a fence, but face to face in the wild. The following weeks unfolded like a heartbeat, steady, fragile, and filled with moments that could break or bloom at any second. Every morning before sunrise, Claire Whitfield would log into the live feed from the camera hidden near the den. The footage was grainy, washed in green from the infrared lens, but she didn't mind. What mattered was movement, one small rhythmic pulse of life among the shadows. And there it was, a mother wolf resting with her pup curled into the hollow of her chest. The first few nights had been touch and go. Sometimes the mother disappeared for hours, hunting or scouting for threats. The pup would squeak faintly in the silence, and Claire's breath would tighten until she saw that flash of red fur return. Each time the mother brought back scraps of meat, dropping them gently beside the tiny muzzle, nudging him to feed. By the end of the second week, the pup had doubled in weight. His fur, once dull and patchy, was now soft and coppery under the moonlight. The team called the operation a success. But Claire didn't celebrate. She knew too well that in the wild, success was temporary, always one storm, one coyote, one careless gunshot away from tragedy. She insisted on conducting follow-up visits herself. The official reason to ensure data accuracy. The real reason she couldn't stay away. The first time she returned to the den, the forest was alive with the scent of wet pine and new growth. She approached quietly, keeping downwind, careful not to disturb. A sudden rustle froze her mid-step. From the thicket ahead, a pair of amber eyes glimmered. The mother wolf. She stood, tall, ears pricked, body taut as a bowstring. For a moment, Claire's breath caught, then she slowly lowered her gaze, turning her body slightly to the side, a gesture of respect she'd learned from years of observation. The wolf didn't flee. Instead, she sniffed the air, tail flicking once. Recognition shimmered between them, brief but undeniable. The same woman who had brought her pup now stood quietly before her, empty-handed, unthreatening. Claire whispered, "It's okay, Mama. I just needed to see you." The wolf tilted her head, the faintest trace of calm settling over her. Then she turned and vanished into the brush, her reddish coat melting into the trees. It was the first time Claire felt something more than scientific detachment, something wordless, ancient: trust. Over the next months, she made the trip once a week, sometimes alone, sometimes with Daniel. They placed motion-triggered cameras along the creek and logged the pup's growth, first steps, first bites of solid food, first playful tugs at his mother's tail. In the footage, the pup was always bold, running, pouncing, biting at insects twice his size. He was stronger than most captive-born wolves Claire had seen. She liked to think a part of Juniper's lineage lived in him, carried from the museum walls to the open wild. By midsummer, the pup could follow his mother on short hunts. The two were inseparable, moving like mirrored shadows between the trees. Claire began to call him in her notes only Brave One. "Don't name him Daniel," warned one evening as they packed up equipment. "I didn't." Claire said, though she knew she had. The summer heat came with new challenges. The wetland pools shrank, drawing in mosquitoes and black flies. Prey grew scarce. Through the cameras, Claire saw the mother returning thinner, her ribs more visible each week. One night, the feed cut abruptly, static filling the screen. When it returned, the den was empty. Claire's stomach dropped. She replayed the footage again and again, scanning every frame. At dawn, she radioed Daniel. "Signal's gone from the collar. I'm heading out there." Hours later, she pushed through the undergrowth, sweat stinging her eyes, heart pounding. The air buzzed with heat and cicadas. Claire slowed down. Daniel called behind her. "If they've moved dens, they'll be nearby." But she didn't slow. She followed the faintest traces, paw prints in the mud, tufts of fur snagged on thorns. Then, from across a dry creek bed, came a sound that stopped her dead in her tracks. A whine. High-pitched, sharp, unmistakable. She scanned the opposite bank, and there he was. The pup, now lean and lanky, standing ankle-deep in the water, ears too big for his head. His fur gleamed red-gold under the sun. Claire froze, barely daring to breathe. He tilted his head, eyes narrowing, studying her. Then, to her disbelief, his tail flicked once, an awkward, uncertain wag. The mother appeared seconds later, bounding to his side. She didn't snarl or retreat. She simply looked at Claire, her gaze steady, as if measuring something unseen. Then she turned, nudged the pup, and the two trotted back into the forest. Daniel whispered, "She knows you." Claire nodded, her throat too tight for words. That night, back at the field station, she logged the encounter. Both subjects healthy, relocated to higher ground near creek bed. Interaction minimal, but calm. She hesitated before typing the next line. Possible recognition behavior observed. She sat there for a long moment, staring at the blinking cursor. Then softly, she added one more sentence. They are surviving. Weeks blurred into months. The summer storms returned, testing every den in the recovery zone. Once, during a torrential downpour, Claire drove through flooded roads to reach the observation post. The telemetry signal flickered weakly, one long pulse, one short. For hours, she and Daniel listened through the static until at last the tone steadied again. "They made it," Daniel said, slumping in his chair. Claire smiled faintly. Of course they did. Each victory felt microscopic to the world, but monumental to her. With every report she filed, with every pup that lived, the species took another fragile step away from extinction. But she also knew this peace wouldn't last. Red wolves matured quickly. Within a year, the pup would no longer need his mother or the human who once bridged their worlds. For now, though, she allowed herself to watch, to breathe, to believe. On the final evening of autumn monitoring, she stood on the edge of the wetland, camera in hand, as the sun dipped low. Across the water, the mother wolf appeared, the pup now nearly her size. They stood in silence, watching her from a distance. The pup lifted his muzzle to the wind. Then a single low howl. It wasn't quite adult, still breaking in pitch like a teenager's voice, but it carried through the cypress trees and echoed across the swamp. Claire laughed through her tears. "Good boy," she whispered. "You found your voice." The mother turned, and together they disappeared into the wild. Back at the museum, Juniper's remaining pups had grown strong. The facility's success record had improved, and new partnerships were forming across state lines. Yet Claire's mind stayed in the wetlands with a wild mother and the brave little red wolf who had learned to call her world home. She didn't know it yet, but their paths weren't done crossing. The next chapter of their story would test everything she believed about survival belonging and what it truly means to save a species. By the time summer turned to autumn, the refuge was breathing again. The trees wore their bronze leaves like armor, and the wetlands shimmered in the late sunlight. For the first time in years, the Red Wolf Recovery Zone was stable. The surviving pups from multiple litters were thriving, dispersing across new territories, their signals blinking steadily across the digital map in the monitoring station. For Claire Whitfield, those blinking dots had become her compass. Each one told a story where the wolves hunted rested-crossed rivers or returned to their dens. It was proof that the species still had a pulse. But on the morning of October 17th, the screen changed. She was halfway through a mug of coffee when one signal the mother's collar stopped moving. A red exclamation mark blinked beside the ID number. At the same moment, another alert appeared on her phone. Wildfire reported. Dare County, Sector 3. Claire's chair scraped back before she realized she was standing. Sector 3. "That's near the marsh ridge," she said aloud. Her voice trembled. "That's her territory." Daniel looked up from his laptop. "We should wait for clearance." But Claire was already grabbing her jacket. If the fire reaches the den, they'll have no chance. By the time they reached the edge of the refuge, smoke was already snaking through the trees. The air shimmered with heat, and the ground crunched underfoot, dry leaves, brittle twigs, all ready to ignite. The faint scent of pine mingled with the acrid sting of burning peat. Fire crews had blocked the main trail. One ranger recognized Claire immediately. "You can't go in there. The wind's shifting. We're evacuating personnel." "I have collared wolves in that area," she said, breathless. "One of them might be trapped near the ridge." The ranger hesitated, then handed her a radio. 15 minutes. No more. Claire and Daniel pushed through the smoke masks, pulled tight across their faces. The forest groaned with the sound of crackling branches. Overhead, the sky glowed a sickly orange. "Signals still active," Daniel shouted over the roar. The receiver beeped rapidly, closer, then cut off. They emerged into a clearing just as a gust of wind carried embers across the treetops. Flames licked up the trunks of pines. And there, through the haze, Claire saw movement. 2 wolves. The mother and her grown pup, now nearly full size, darted between the burning logs, frantic. Smoke swirled around them. The mother coughed, stumbling eyes wild. Claire froze. Every protocol screamed at her to stay back. She wasn't supposed to interfere. Not physically. Not ever. But as the fire surged, instinct overrode training. She dropped her pack, grabbed a fire blanket from the emergency kit, and sprinted toward the clearing. Daniel shouted her name, but his voice vanished in the roar. "Claire, no." She leapt over a fallen branch, heat blasting against her face. The wolves had backed against a patch of bare soil, hemmed in by flames on 3 sides. "Hey, this way," she yelled, waving her arms. The mother wolf turned ears flat, snarling a warning. "I'm not here to hurt you," Claire, whispered, voice breaking. "Just go. Go." Then, as if understanding, the mother bolted past her, the younger wolf close behind. They disappeared into the smoke just as a branch collapsed, sending sparks raining down. Claire covered her head, coughing violently. Her lungs burned. Through watering eyes, she saw the two shapes vanish into the tree line beyond the fire line. Gone. Alive. By the time the fire crews reached her, she was kneeling in the ash, trembling soot covering her face. "You're out of your mind," Daniel said, dragging her to her feet. "I know," she rasped, "but they're alive." That night, as the flames died down, rain began to fall, soft, steady, merciful. The storm that had once brought destruction now brought relief. Claire watched from the command tent wrapped in a blanket as water hissed against the smoldering earth. On the telemetry monitor, 2 signals blinked faintly. Still moving. Days later, when the fire zone was finally declared safe, the team returned to assess the damage. Whole sections of the forest were blackened, the air thick with the scent of charcoal and wet ash. Yet amid the devastation, signs of life were everywhere: fresh paw prints in the mud, a rabbit trail, feathers scattered near a creek. Then, at the base of a scorched pine, Daniel pointed. "Look." Claire followed his gaze. Pressed into the soot was the print of a wolf paw, larger than she remembered. And beside it, a smaller one, lighter, neater. "Mother and daughter," she murmured. They made it through. For the first time in weeks, she let herself smile. That evening, as the team drove back, the horizon glowed faintly pink, the kind of sunset that turned everything to gold. Claire leaned against the window, eyes half closed. The image replayed in her mind again and again, the mother turning toward her in the firelight, not with fear, but recognition. It wasn't gratitude wolves didn't feel that the way humans did. It was something older, something that spoke without words. She had risked everything to give them a chance, and they had taken it. A few days later, Claire was summoned to the regional FWS office. The meeting was formal, clinical, the kind of setting where emotion had no place. Across the table sat the program director, glasses glinting under fluorescent light. "You entered an active fire zone without clearance," he said evenly. "Yes, sir." "You made physical contact within the reintroduction area. I did not touch them. I directed them out. That's still interference." Claire said nothing. He sighed, flipping through her file. "Claire, you've done extraordinary work for this program, but we can't afford mistakes. You'll be suspended from field duty until the review board concludes." Her chest went cold. "How long?" "As long as it takes." That night, she sat alone in her small apartment above the museum. The hum of the refrigerator was the only sound. On her table lay the field radio, now silent, and a small framed photo, a still from her camera feed. The mother wolf curled around the pup months ago. She traced a finger over the glass. "You made it out," she whispered. "That's all that matters." Outside, thunder rolled again in the distance. Rain began to patter against the window, but instead of dread, she felt a strange peace. Nature wasn't forgiving, but it was cyclical. Fire gave way to rain, loss to renewal. Somewhere out there in the damp ashes of a burned forest, 2 red wolves were beginning again. A week later, Daniel stopped by her office with a small USB drive. "Footage from the new camera traps," he said quietly. "You should see this." Claire hesitated, then plugged it into her laptop. The screen flickered to life footage from a ridge overlooking the marsh. There they were. The mother and her grown pup both alive, their fur shimmering in the morning light. The pup, no longer a pup, really walked beside her confidently. They paused at the edge of a clearing, sniffing the air. The mother turned her head toward the camera, and for a split second, Claire could have sworn she looked straight at her. Then they vanished into the trees. Claire sat back, tears streaming down her cheeks. "They're still here," she whispered. "They survived the fire." She closed her eyes and let herself cry, not out of sadness, but release. All those months of sleepless nights, The endless reports, the guilt and fear and silence, they all melted away. The fire hadn't just tested the wolves, it had tested her too. And in their survival, she found her own. The fire left more than smoke in its wake. It left questions. For weeks afterward, the smell of char still lingered in the air, and the public began asking what no one wanted to confront. Should the red wolves still be here at all? The debate started small, an editorial in the local paper, a few angry comments on social media, but it spread like wildfire of its own. Farmers complained of missing chickens and calves, blaming wolves, though evidence was thin. Hunters accused the Fish and Wildlife Service of valuing predators over people. Politicians promised accountability. And at the center of it all was a single image, the now viral photo of Claire Whitfield kneeling in ash, her face streaked with soot, eyes wide as the fire raged behind her. Someone from the fire crew had snapped it on a phone and posted it online. To the public, she was either a hero or a fool. Claire tried to ignore it. She spent her suspension helping at the museum's education center, giving talks about conservation to children. She smiled for them, told simple stories, how wolves help balance the ecosystem, how each species matters. But every night, she'd scroll through the comments on her phone, the headlines that twisted what happened. Reckless biologist breaks rules to save wolves. Government program. Endangers local livelihoods. Do we need predators in our backyards? The words cut deeper than she expected, not because they doubted her, but because they doubted the wolves. A month later, she was called back to the regional FWS headquarters. The review board sat in the same sterile room as before. 3 people, this time, not one. Papers spread before them, the tone clinical, but tired. Ms. Whitfield said the chairwoman, your actions in the fire zone violated protocol. However, your intervention likely prevented the deaths of 2 wolves critical to the current population model. Given the unique circumstances, the board has decided to lift your suspension, effective immediately. Claire's shoulders sagged in relief. Thank you. But the woman continued, you will not return to field duty for now. You'll be reassigned to public outreach and education. You'll help build bridges between the program and the community. It's time people see the human side of this work. Claire nodded slowly. She understood what they were really saying. You're too visible now to hide behind the field cameras. Her first public meeting took place in a rural community hall in Hyde County. Folding chairs filled the room and the air buzzed with tension. Posters showing wolves hung behind the podium. When she stepped up to the microphone, murmurs rippled through the crowd. Someone whispered, "That's her, the one from the fire." She cleared her throat. "My name is Claire Whitfield. I've worked with the Red Wolf Recovery Program for nearly 10 years. I'm not here to tell you how to live with wolves. I'm here to listen and maybe to help us understand each other." A man in the back stood up. "You people keep bringing them back, and we keep losing livestock. When do our lives matter more than your science?" Claire took a slow breath. "I know what loss feels like. I've seen it in the wild, and I've seen it here. But wolves aren't your enemy. They don't take more than they need, and when they thrive, the land thrives too. Deer populations stay balanced. Wetlands stay healthy. It's all connected." The man crossed his arms unimpressed. "Sounds like theory. We deal with reality." A few chuckles followed, low and bitter. Claire paused, then said quietly, "Reality is that fewer than 30 red wolves remain free in the wild. I've watched one mother risk everything to raise a pup that wasn't even hers. If she can find room in her world for something that wasn't born to her, maybe we can too." The hall fell silent. An older woman near the front, her gray hair tucked beneath a worn cap, stood and spoke softly. "My granddaughter saw a wolf near our pond last winter. She said it was beautiful. We were scared at first, but then we realized we were lucky to see something wild again. The tension eased just a little. Claire smiled faintly. That's what this is about. Not fear, not control, just coexistence. After the meeting, several people approached her with quiet questions. What to do if they saw a wolf, how to protect livestock, without trapping, how to tell red wolves apart from coyotes. She answered each one patiently, writing down hotline numbers, handing out brochures. Outside, as the sun set over the fields, Daniel leaned against her car. "You handled that well." She exhaled. "I don't think I changed anyone's mind." "Maybe not," he said, "but you gave them something new to think about." Over the following months, her new role expanded. She began hosting workshops in schools, producing short documentaries for the museum's channel, even leading guided tours through protected areas. Her voice, once heard only on field radios, was now reaching thousands. The backlash didn't disappear, but something else grew alongside it: understanding. People began sharing photos of wolf tracks, not as threats, but as sightings. Ranchers started testing new fencing methods funded by conservation grants. Local news replaced angry headlines with cautious optimism. And quietly within the refuge, the wolves continued to thrive. One morning, while preparing slides for a conference, Claire received a message from Daniel. "We picked up new signals. The mother's collar still active. Guess what pup's transmitting to?" "She's been tagged." Claire froze. "She..." "Yeah. The brave one's a she. And she's paired up." Claire's eyes filled with tears. The pup, the same one she had carried in a box so many months ago, was now an adult carving out her own territory, carrying the bloodline forward. A small miracle born of science, instinct, and something deeper. That night, Claire stood outside the museum after everyone had gone home. The city lights shimmered in the distance, but her gaze drifted toward the dark horizon, the invisible line where wilderness began. The wolves were out there, still walking, still surviving. And though the world around them argued, protested, doubted, they did what wolves had always done. They endured. Winter settled over the wetlands like a quiet blanket. The marsh grasses stood brittle and gold, and the rivers ran dark beneath sheets of ice. For the red wolves, this was the season of movement, young dispersers leaving their birth packs to find territories of their own. For Claire Whitfield, it was the season of endings. After months of public work and outreach, she received an envelope from the Fish and Wildlife Service. Inside, a transfer order, temporary but final in tone. She was to assist with a special release operation at Alligator River National Wildlife Refuge. A pair of wolves, including one recently tagged female, would be relocated to strengthen the northern pack. When she read the ID code of the female, her breath caught. RW223F. She didn't need to check the database. It was her. The foster pup, the one who had survived the flood, the fire, the odds. The one she'd carried in her hands like a heartbeat. 2 weeks later, Claire stood on the frozen edge of the refuge snow, crunching beneath her boots. The truck beside her idled softly, its back doors open. Inside, 2 wolves rested in separate transport crates. The male paced restlessly, his breath steaming through the mesh. The female sat still, her amber eyes calm, alert, unafraid. "She's steady," said Daniel, scanning the vitals. "Heart rate normal. Weight perfect." Claire nodded. She was always brave. He glanced at her. "You sure you're okay with this?" She smiled faintly. "I've known since the day we placed her in that den that this moment would come. Wolves are meant to be free. That's what we've been fighting for." Still, her voice trembled when she added, "But it doesn't make goodbye any easier." They drove deep into the refuge, guided by GPS and instinct. The world grew quieter as they went, until only the wind and the crunch of tires on ice remained. The release site was chosen carefully: dense forest, abundant deer, far from roads and towns. When they arrived, the sun hung low, painting the snow with amber light. The rangers positioned the crates side by side and stepped back. "This is it," Daniel said softly. Claire took a deep breath. Her hands moved automatically, unlatching bolts, lifting the door bar, but her heart was pounding. The male wolf burst out first, bounding through the snow in a spray of white powder. His coat glowed copper under the sun. He paused, once looked back, then disappeared into the trees. The female stayed still. For a moment, she just stood in the open crate, nose lifted to the wind. Then her eyes found Claire. It wasn't imagination. It wasn't projection. It was recognition. Her head tilted slightly the way her mother once had, and her tail flicked once, slow and deliberate. Then she stepped down from the crate and began to walk toward the forest. Halfway across the clearing, she stopped, turned back one last time, and met Claire's gaze again. A long, low howl rose from her throat, deep, resonant, steady. It carried through the trees across the frozen marsh, echoing through the vast, empty land. Claire's breath caught. The sound wasn't sorrowful. It was something else, something like acknowledgement. Then the wolf turned and vanished into the wild. Daniel broke the silence first. "She remembered you." Claire's eyes glistened. Or maybe she remembered trust. They packed in silence, neither wanting to break the moment's fragile spell. As they drove back toward the station, the sun dipped below the horizon, turning the world to silver and shadow. That night, alone in her cabin, Claire wrote her final field note. Subject: RW223F, successfully released with mate in Northern Refuge Sector. No signs of distress. Behavior at release: calm and purposeful. Interaction prior to departure suggests recognition of human caregiver. She hesitated, then added one last line. "I've never believed more in what we do." She closed the notebook, set it beside the small carved wolf figurine she kept on her desk, and exhaled. For the first time in years, she didn't feel the need to check her telemetry monitor before bed. Somewhere out there, the wolves were living their story without her, and that she realized was the truest measure of success. Weeks later, she returned to the museum for a speaking event. A crowd of students filled the auditorium. Behind her, a photo projection showed a red wolf against a backdrop of frost-tipped grass. She began simply. "When I first started working with red wolves, there were fewer than 30 left in the wild. Today, there are more, but not enough. Everyone that survives does so because someone believed it was worth the effort." She paused, scanning the faces before her. "But I want you to understand something. This isn't a story about humans saving wolves. It's a story about wolves teaching us what survival really means." She clicked the remote. A new image appeared, the foster mother curled around her pup the night of the transfer, the one Claire had watched through that first camera feed. Sometimes, she said softly, saving a species isn't about science or strength. Sometimes it's about love, the kind that crosses fear boundaries, even species. The kind that tells us it's okay to let go. The room was silent, except for the hum of the projector. Claire smiled. "When you walk outside tonight, look toward the horizon. If you listen carefully, you might just hear them, the wild still breathing." That evening, as she locked up her office, she noticed a light snow falling outside. The flakes caught in her hair, melting instantly. She closed her eyes and listened. Far away, almost too faint to be real, a howl rose through the night. Not a recording, not a dream. A living sound traveling miles through the cold air. She smiled, whispering into the wind, "Good night, brave one." 5 years passed. The world moved on new storms, new news cycles, new crises. But for Claire Whitfield, Time no longer revolved around headlines. It moved with the rhythm of nature, season by season, migration by migration, call by distant call. She had traded the mud and radio static of fieldwork for the calm routine of the museum's Conservation Education Center. There were classes to teach, interns to train, lectures to give. Children gathered in front of her exhibits, tracing the outlines of red wolf paw prints etched into glass. Sometimes one would ask, "Do you think they still remember you?" And Claire would smile. Maybe they remember what kindness feels like. That's enough. But every year on the anniversary of the fire, she drove east to the wetlands where it all began. She never told anyone. It wasn't official work. It was something quieter, sacred. She'd park her truck near the same old trailhead step, out into the crisp air, and just listen. Most years she heard nothing but the rustle of reeds and the hum of frogs. But one year everything changed. It was late autumn 2030. The refuge looked different now, renewed, alive. Saplings had replaced the charred trees, and the ground was thick with wildflowers. The Fish and Wildlife Service had expanded the protected area, installing new signs: red wolf habitat, do not enter without permit. Claire smiled as she walked, the perimeter fence camera in hand. The telemetry receivers had been replaced long ago by remote drones and AI sensors, but she still preferred the old ways: boots, binoculars, and patience. Halfway down the ridge, she saw it: paw prints in the soft mud. 2 adults, and smaller ones, at least 4, maybe 5. Her pulse quickened. She set her backpack down and knelt, measuring the prints. The adult tracks were large, symmetrical, confident, but the smaller ones, those were new, light and clumsy. Pups. Somewhere nearby, a den. Claire stood still, letting the wind carry her scent away. Then she heard it: a low whine, soft but unmistakable. From the underbrush, a shape emerged. A red wolf stepped into the clearing, her fur glowing russet against the fading light. She moved with the easy grace of an animal that feared nothing here. And then Claire saw it, the faint scar beneath her right ear barely visible under the thick fur. Her heart skipped a beat. "RW223F," she whispered. The wolf paused, head tilted. The same gesture. It couldn't be coincidence. Behind her, 4 pups tumbled clumsily through the grass, yipping and nipping at one another's tails. The mother turned, nuzzling them with a gentleness that made Claire's throat tighten. She lifted her camera, but stopped halfway. Somehow it felt wrong to capture the moment. This wasn't data, it was grace. The wolf looked at her once more, long enough for recognition to flicker in those amber eyes. Then, with a single twitch of her tail, she guided her pups toward the woods. As they disappeared into the trees, one of the pups turned back, curious, watching the strange human standing motionless at the edge of the clearing. Claire smiled through tears. "Go on," she whispered. "The world's waiting for you." Later, as dusk fell, she sat by the truck, writing in her field journal, the same one she had carried through storms and fires years ago. The pages were wrinkled, stained, but still whole. RW223F observed with 4 offspring near Ridge Sector. All individuals, healthy, behavior calm, no signs of distress. Species recovery appears sustainable. Observation made from 70 meters, no interference. Then she hesitated, and beneath the technical notes, she wrote something more personal. She remembered. Or maybe I just needed to believe she did. The next morning, Claire drove into town and stopped by the small diner that had been serving coffee to biologists and farmers alike for decades. The owner, a white-haired woman with kind eyes, recognized her immediately. Still chasing ghosts, the woman teased. "Not ghosts," Claire replied with a smile. "Survivors." The woman poured her a cup of coffee and leaned on the counter. "You know, my grandson swears he saw one near our pasture last spring. Said it was watching him like it knew he wouldn't hurt it." "Then he's lucky," Claire said softly. Most people never get that close to the wild. The woman nodded. They say they're coming back, the red wolves. Slowly, but surely. Claire looked out the window toward the horizon, where the morning mist hung low over the fields. Yes, she whispered, slowly, but surely. That evening, she returned to the museum and stood before the glass enclosure where a new generation of captive wolves rested. A young caretaker stood nearby, notebook in hand. "Dr. Whitfield," the girl asked, "do you ever miss the field?" Claire smiled. "Every day. But you know what I miss most? What the sound. That moment before dawn when the forest is still and you hear a howl that reminds you you're not alone on this planet." The caretaker smiled, nodding. "I hope I get to hear that one day." "You will," Claire said, "if you listen hard enough." A week later, she received an official FWS update in her email. Population estimate 52 wild red wolves across North Carolina recovery zones. Confirmed litters. Total pups, 28. Claire leaned back in her chair, reading the numbers over and over. For most people, it was just data. For her, it was a symphony. She opened her old field file and added one final note beneath the original project summary. It worked. They came back. That night, she walked out onto the museum's rooftop terrace, where the city lights faded into the dark. The air was cool, tinged with salt from the distant sea. Somewhere far to the east, deep in the wetlands, a faint sound rose, a long melodic howl drifting through the wind. Claire closed her eyes, letting the sound wrap around her like a memory. It wasn't just one voice. It was many echoing, intertwining, a chorus of life that refused to be forgotten. And beneath that sound, she thought she heard another, a softer tone, familiar and steady. Her brave one. The red wolves of North Carolina were never supposed to come back. They were ghosts written off by history, extinct in the wild. By 1980, their howls silenced by fear, misunderstanding, and the slow march of human progress. And yet, 45 years later, they sing again. Their voices aren't loud. They don't echo across cities or make headlines. But if you stand quietly enough, deep within the cypress swamps at dawn, you'll hear them, a low, trembling harmony that rises from the mist like a promise kept. For Claire Whitfield, that sound has become something more than science. It's the echo of every act of faith it took to bring them back. It's the sound of people who refuse to give up. Red wolves survive because of patience, the slow, unglamorous kind. The kind that rebuilds trust, one den, one community, one heartbeat at a time. They survive because people like Claire chose not just to study them, but to believe in them. Because every collar signal, every transfer, every sleepless night meant another chance for the wild to heal itself. And they survive because of compassion, the rarest currency in conservation. It's easy to save what's cute or convenient, harder to save what's complicated, misunderstood, even feared. But somewhere between the teeth and the tenderness lies the truth: the wild needs both courage and care to survive. When we talk about extinction, we often talk about numbers, populations, percentages, graphs. But behind every statistic is a story like this one, a story of hands that carried eyes that watched, hearts that refused to stop hoping. Maybe that's what the red wolves have taught us most of all, that survival isn't about strength alone. It's about connection, between parent and pup, between scientist and wilderness, between all of us and the fragile world we share. Today, fewer than 60 red wolves roam the wilds of North Carolina. Each one is a miracle wrapped in fur and instinct. Each step they take writes a new line in the story of recovery, a story that could end or continue depending on what we choose to do next. Because their fate isn't sealed. It's still being written by every choice we make, every acre we protect, every voice that speaks up for what cannot speak for itself. People ask me if wolves remember us. I think it's the other way around. We're the ones who need to remember them, to remember what wildness sounds like and why it matters. So when you hear their howls, whether in person on a recording or in a story like this one, don't hear it as something distant or fragile. Hear it as a reminder that the wild is still out there, that compassion still matters, that hope once given can ripple through generations. Because the red wolf's return isn't just a conservation success, it's a love story between humanity and the earth we nearly forgot how to care for.